This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It's all about taking your kids travelling today. This is one of my favourite topics, and there's a couple of episodes in our back catalogue where we've talked about taking kids travelling before, but it bears repeating because I know a lot of people feel like taking their kids travelling, especially when they're relatively young, can be quite a hassle, or some people, and I really beg to differ here, think it's a waste of time because they won't remember it. But I really think it's well worth it for so many reasons. And that's what today's guests and I chat about. Lots of different reasons why it's really worth taking your kids travelling. There's so many benefits for them. And in particular, my final guest today, Penny Wincer, has some really interesting stuff to say because she takes her kids travelling despite having quite a few challenges connected with that. So, in fact, it's only, as I record, it's about 3 weeks ago. By the time this comes out, it'll be a bit over a month, I guess, since I took my son out of school for a week to go travelling, to take him to Singapore and Malaysia. And it's not often that I take him out of school, and I do it with a little bit of guilt. And we're lucky here in Australia. I know in England, for example, you can be fined for taking your children out of school to travel during term time. So I'm glad I don't have to pay a fine, and I would reconsider if that was the case, but maybe I wouldn't reconsider for very long. The reason I went during term time is because I had amazing chance to get super cheap flights, the likes of which I would never find in the school holidays, and it would have meant we couldn't travel if we didn't use these super cheap flights. That was just the way it was this year. And especially in retrospect, I don't regret it at all. And I was reminded so clearly that for my son, and for many kids, but if I can tell you just my personal example, for my son, it is so beneficial for him to have some time in a foreign country, seeing new things, kind of resetting his, perception of life, I suppose. So he can be a kid who gets a bit stressed by things, gets a bit worried, doesn't always want to go to school and all of that. But traveling makes him so confident, and he comes back kind of like with this big boost of energy and confidence, and especially if we go somewhere that's really different. So it's so worthwhile. But don't rely on my testimony. I've got 3 guests today to tell you more about the value of taking kids traveling. And my first guest is Sharon Gourlay of Where's Sharon? And she doesn't just have 1 kid when she travels, she has 3, so she knows even better than me.
Really, I think the best thing about it is just quality family time. And I know that in theory you should be able to get that without travelling, but it's really hard when you're at home. There's just always something distracting you, whether it's even just, you have to vacuum the floor, or you got to cook dinner. There's just always something that sort of distracts you from having like really good time together. Whereas I find when we travel, like that's our focus, and it's just really great to give yourself the excuse to make it your focus.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I agree completely. And it's very hard to recreate that feeling at home, because even if you say, okay, we're not going to do any housework or whatever, but you can see it and it's in the back of your mind, and it's just,
exactly.
It's very hard to do that. Yeah.
Something we have enjoyed doing at home though, actually, is even just going to a hotel overnight in the city centre or something. Like that's sort of a way to try and recreate that aspect. But if we stay at home, we just can't. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, you're so right. We went for a night in a hotel in Fremantle a couple of months back, and I realised, wow, this really does. I always thought, it's a bit silly when it's just down the road, but it really did feel like travelling.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
Fun. Yeah. What do you think what benefits do you think your kids have had the most from travelling so far? So at the moment you've got how old are they? Are they sort of, so?
My daughter was 7 yesterday.
Yes, that's right. So 7.
And I got a 5-year-old, and my baby is 1 next week.
Oh, so. I can't believe he's 1. So, so especially for your older 2, what kind of benefits have you seen already in their young lives from travelling?
I just think they're very worldly, and they don't have I think they have less set expectations of how things are supposed to be, just in general, because they're used to things being more fluid. And yeah, like they have a really good appreciation of difference and of the world, and like they're very good at geography for their age, I think, too. And
yes, I bet.
yeah, and just I just think they see difference in a different way. It's sort of hard to explain, but it's like they don't really see it as much as other people.
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens. And then your kids have had the experience of even like going to school in Malaysia and stuff like that, haven't they? So it's like a really immersive way to have travelled.
Yeah, and I think too, like, because now they're in Melbourne and they do go to a bilingual school, like that wasn't a shock for my daughter to suddenly go to school where she'd have 90% of the time in another language, because it was a bit like that in Malaysia, and she's just like, she already understands that people speak different languages.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I think it made a big difference. She doesn't see it as weird that she goes to school and speaks a different language.
Yes, I can imagine, whereas for others it would be a massive shock. Yeah, it'll be so interesting to fast forward 20 or 30 or 40 years and see how all of this impacts them as adults, because obviously we had different upbringings to that. And it'll be see when you start so young to be able to really appreciate, that the world is a smaller place and that people are all, good and the same. It must make a big difference to your kind of worldview as you grow up.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. Like, it's always one of my goals to bring them up to feel like global citizens, not like Australians. So, I mean, it seems to be working so far.
Yes, fabulous. Have your kids got particular places they desperately want to go at the moment?
Yeah, my son really wants to go to the Colosseum in Rome, so we're actually going to be able to do that. And I just told him that a couple of days ago, and you should have seen the look on his face. It made me so proud. His whole face was just so happy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, they're kids still. A lot of the time they just get caught up, like they love Disneyland or they love Kidzania. Kidzania is a massive one with them. But yeah, no, they do get into like the big attractions like adults would, and I don't know. Yeah, like everything really. Or we're going to go spend Christmas in the snow. So they've not seen snow. So they're really excited by that.
Oh, yes. My son will be very jealous about that because he hasn't seen snow properly either. He's had this kind of smattering of it on the ground in Iceland, and that's as close as he's got.
Yeah, I bet he thought it was cool though.
Oh, he did think it was cool, except now he's been complaining recently that he hasn't seen proper snow. And I've had to tell him that it took me until 26 to see proper snow, so you just have to wait a bit more.
Yeah, I grew up on a mountain in Tassie, so occasionally we would get some snow, so it's not quite the same for me. But yeah, I mean, in Australia you never really get snow very well.
No, not like you're going to have in your white Swiss Christmas. Sharon lists a lot of great benefits for kids from travelling, some of which I remember from my own childhood. Simple things like having good geography. I spent 6 months in Europe, aged 9, and my geography of Europe benefited me, my knowledge of this benefited me for the rest of my school life. It was just so much easier because I'd been there and I could remember, where France was in relation to Germany and capital cities and currencies and all kinds of things. And studying history meant more because I'd been there. So, just academically, there's these advantages, but things like having less set expectations and being more fluid. And I love Sharon's idea of bringing them up to feel like global citizens, because I think that's a really important thing in today's world, especially thanks to the internet. It is a very, very global world, so it's great to be able to look beyond just your home country. Now, my next guest is the lovely Brooke McAlary of the Slow Home podcast, and she and I are very, very much on the same page when we think about travelling with kids. So a lot of the things she's about to say are the kind of things that I want to say over and over. She just seems to say it a bit more eloquently. So let's chat to Brooke.
I know people who travel fast and broad with kids, and my hat is eternally off to them.
Yes, mine too. No, me neither.
I couldn't do it. I really couldn't. The only time that I'm happy to travel long distances in a short period of time is if we're just getting somewhere.
Yeah, yes. We have to get to Canada. It's quite far. We'll just get that over and done with, and then we'll stop. Yeah.
It's one really long day, and then we've got some time to just chill out. So I don't mind that because, you can't meander on a plane anyway. So,
no.
I think, but for me, it was definitely kids, and to just see how they take a little time to acclimatize to a place, but then they just adapt and they fit in because they're so fluid, and kids are so adaptable. But I also think that in a practical sense, having the kids made us slow down because they wanted to do things like go to a park. If they see a playground,
exactly.
They want to play in the playground. They don't care if there's a beautiful cathedral around the corner. No. They want to play in the playground. So you have to stop when you find yourself sitting there, and maybe you buy an ice cream, and maybe you get talking to people, and maybe half the day goes, but
that's
who cares?
Okay.
Because because it's it's wonderful, and we're taking our time rather than kind of forcing everyone into this box of hurry.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's so true. I mean, I have had the same experience across numerous European playgrounds of all kinds. And I find even just that as like the cultural differences between playgrounds, I find absolutely fascinating. And I never would have had that experience without having a child to take with me to playgrounds, because that would look kind of weird otherwise.
Yes. But it's not dissimilar to going to a library or, to like a community swimming pool or something like that. You really get to hang out with the people who live there, and you just get a much better sense of the pace of a place, and I don't know, the vibe and the feeling of it, and the kind of people who call it home. And I think there's something really, really beautiful and connecting in that. I think you start to see that people are all very alike.
Yes, absolutely.
And for me, that's been a huge point to travel, and one of the reasons that I want our kids, we're fortunate enough to be able to introduce our kids to travel from a relatively young age, because they start to see, just by virtue of doing things like going to the library or the playground, that people, they might speak different languages, they might eat different food, they might look different to each of us, but we are all the same, or we all have friends and family and things that we care about. And I think there's so much value in kids learning that from a young age.
Oh, absolutely. You are a girl after my own heart, because that is my biggest thing about travelling too, is that, everyone, when it comes down to it, we're really all extraordinarily alike. And, and I think you're exactly right, that kids being able to learn that from a young age. I mean, I've had my son play in playgrounds all across Europe where he can't speak the language of the other kids, and they don't care, especially when he was younger. It, starts to get more difficult in a sense as he's older and, more verbal, but especially when he was sort of 2, 3, 4, and, they would just play together for an hour. It didn't matter that they couldn't speak each other's language, and they would figure out something to do together, and it was just beautiful to see.
No, exactly. Our kids have had the same experiences, and it's not even about them being big experiences for them. It's just a constant and gentle reminder that, we can connect. We don't need to be afraid of people who we don't know. We can just be and coexist. And I think,
it's normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. I always remember when I lived in Japan, I lived my second year in it was a bit further from the major cities, and I'd often see people who, well, there weren't many foreigners around, put it that way, and I'd often come across people on the train, and their kids would be like either scared or intensely curious about me, and they had never seen a foreigner before, and of course they then also never played with a foreign child. And I mean, Japan is especially, very, very homogenous, and sometimes they'd come up and talk to me, but sometimes I had a kid burst into tears because he saw me and thought, what's this person? She looks so different from the rest of us. What's going on? And I don't want my son to have that feeling.
No, exactly. We're fortunate enough to be able to show our kids some of the world, and I think that's one of the best outcomes, is for them to just be so open. I think kids typically are born open.
Yes.
And I think that let's develop that.
Yes,
rather than,
let's keep that.
Close it down.
Keep that going. I mean, and that's one of the arguments why I think it's perfectly okay and very useful to travel with kids even when they're too young to really remember it. Because they're learning so much that they're taking in that will, shape them for life. So
absolutely. Yeah, and that's a question that we've had before. I mean, our kids were only 4 and 5 when we first took them to Canada, so they weren't babies, but they're not going to remember much of it. They might remember little bits and pieces from a video or from a photo, but as for their true root memories, there won't be a lot there, and that's okay.
It's
that's really okay.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I mean, they're really good travelers now. And that's because there's like the foundation of them understanding. We explain, what you do and don't do on a plane from a young age and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're used to it.
There's no angst involved in the actual act of traveling, but they're also just used to the fact that things are going to be different. Sometimes we don't know where we're going. Sometimes we don't speak the language. Sometimes the food doesn't taste like it does at home. All of those things are okay because they're just used to it.
Yeah.
And I think, I agree with you completely that, it's perfectly great and wonderful to introduce kids to travel before they're going to remember it if that's what you want to do.
This message that Brooke and I both agree that travelling offers our kids, the message that people all around the world are all the same. I just think that's such a powerful message, and the more people could know that and understand it, really have lived it and understand it, just seems like it could solve a whole lot of problems. So I think that's such an important reason to take your kids travelling. Everything else Brooke said is exactly spot on, I think. We're very like-minded in this respect. Now, my final guest today is Penny Wincer, and I really enjoyed having this chat with her. So she has a 7-year-old son who has autism, and that certainly makes travelling much, much more difficult. And she'll explain how and what she's done about it. And I really admire her that despite the difficulties and the challenges of travelling with a child with autism, she's determined to do it because she can see the benefits. And I hope that this is inspiring for other parents with kids with special needs, that certainly it won't be what you would imagine it would be otherwise, but maybe there's still some ways to travel which benefit all involved.
He was diagnosed when he was 3. The last time he went on a big trip before that was when he was about, I think the last time I took him to Melbourne was when he was about 16 months old, and I live in London, so that's obviously quite an intensely really long trip.
Yep.
And then not long after that, I fell pregnant with my daughter, and then it was when she was born, when he was 2, that we really saw that there was actually quite a big problem going on. And then he had a diagnosis by the time he was 3. It is really difficult because he's quite it's hard to describe how he is because all autistic children are really different. But
they're so varied,
quite affected by autism. His speech isn't fluent. He's very reliant on routines. He has quite a lot of anxiety. He's got very severe eating issues.
Mm-hmm.
He can't really play in the way that other children play. He can talk, but he doesn't have conversations.
Sure.
So all of these things present quite a lot of difficulty with travel.
Yeah, especially routines. Like breaking the routine is like travel is completely throwing routines out the window a lot of the time, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other big problem with travel is the amount of changes and transitions that happen within quick succession.
Right.
So Arthur can cope with so many changes at one time, but when you've got so many so close together, it just becomes too much. It becomes like a build-up.
Sure.
And then it's just using too much of that mental energy he needs to use to keep himself together and to stay regulated. And so I've had to really massively adapt how we travel. And we didn't actually travel for quite a long time when he was young, probably between the ages of 3 and 5. I didn't really take him anywhere. And that was partly because I was really just trying to get my head around his needs. And then also I had my daughter who was 2 years younger, so she was very young.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I'm now also a single parent, so that adds extra challenges.
Yes,
because
you're outnumbered.
Outnumbered, and he does need a very high level of care compared to another 7-year-old.
Sure.
So it was very challenging, but I've been a lifelong traveller, and it's really important to me. And I just became determined that it couldn't stop us. Like I just thought I'm going to become resentful if I can't expand our world a little bit. Yeah. And I think this is a really big problem with a lot of families with kids with special needs, is that their worlds become very small. It's so easy to happen because actually, day-to-day life is quite hard. And so then anyone who's travelled with small children knows that it's kind of just like transferring home to another place. It's still quite hard, and sometimes it's a bit harder. And with travelling with a child with autism, it's it's hard at home anyway, and then you take them somewhere else and it's actually extra hard because they're dealing with all of these extra, sensory inputs and transitions that they don't usually have to deal with at home, and so many unknowns. So it is really challenging, and I can totally see why families get scared off doing it and don't want to do it. But I've just become very determined that we're not going to let it stop us.
Good on you.
But I also have to be extremely mindful about how I travel with him and how I do it, and also what I can cope with. So it's meant a couple of things. Firstly, at the moment, it means we're not flying right now. And it's not because of the plane. I think actually he's going to love that. It's the airport that's really going to present a lot of problems for him.
Yes.
So we will do it at some point. Maybe we'll do it next year. I know now that Heathrow and Gatwick have autism-friendly services, and I think
excellent
they do, and they're supposed to be excellent. And so they help shuffle you through everything as quickly as possible, and so you don't wait for anything.
Yes,
it's more the other ends I'm worried about.
Sure, the destination.
And so I'll have to do the destination ends. So I will have to do a lot of research before we do it, but I suspect we will definitely get there. But it's little steps.
Absolutely,
so for now,
yes.
I
don't blame you.
So for now, we're traveling in the car, and he really likes the car now, which is fantastic. When he was young, he really hated it, so that was a big problem. But now he really loves it, and it's a safe space for him. He feels really comfortable there.
It's familiar.
So we're doing driving holidays at the moment. So for instance, in Easter, we went to Wales to stay in these fantastic domes at a beautiful kind of camp holiday place that I actually discovered through work. I went to photograph the owner's house, and I've been back a couple of times actually for different work things. And it was so wonderful because, of course, I got to know her and I talked to her about Arthur's needs, and I was able to ask her questions, and she answered everything I needed to know, and it just seemed just right. And it was the most wonderful trip. And we were staying in these kind of biodomes, and it was wonderful because it was very cozy and comfortable, but they had proper beds, proper floors, proper beds, but it was like being in a cocoon at the same time.
Oh, how
so
wonderful.
It was just
I want to go there.
Oh, it's amazing. If you've come to the UK next time, you absolutely must go. It is just the most incredible place.
I will.
So we stayed in these amazing domes. There's a wood fire stove. It's still quite chilly here at Easter. Proper beds, which is quite important for him because he needs to, I brought his own duvet with him so that he feels like he's at home.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And electricity as well, which unfortunately for us is really, really necessary because he does have some home comforts he needs to have.
Sure.
Like certain music he listens to at bedtime. He does still need the iPad when we travel quite a lot, unfortunately.
Oh, I think a lot of 7-year-olds do anyway. So,
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame because, I mean, obviously the kind of place we like to go to is the kind of place people usually unplug.
Yeah.
But there are certain tricky times of the day, like first thing in the morning and in the evening, that are quite difficult for him when he's expecting to be at home, and he can get quite upset.
Yeah.
And so we use the iPad at those times of the day where it can just help him feel comfortable and feel like he's got his
doing
familiar things around.
Regular, normal routine kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that went so wonderfully well. It was about a 10-minute walk from a National Trust beach, which was just incredible and dramatic and beautiful. And so we got up each morning and walked in our pajamas down to the beach, and he was the first one down to the beach at 7:30 every morning, stripped down to his pants every day. He likes being naked, and and playing in the sand. And I have the most incredible pictures of him just running wild on the beach at 7:30 in the morning. In April in Wales.
Gosh, it sounds chilly.
I was a bit mad, but anyway. So there is actually so much we can do.
I really love Penny's optimistic outlook here and her determination to give her kids the experience of travel within the challenges that they face. And I'm sure that this will expand bit by bit as her son gets older. So good luck with that, Penny, and I'm really impressed at how much you can still get out there. So well done. Now, let me tell you where you can find some info about our lovely guest today. Of course, it was episode 66, which means you can find the show notes at notaballerina.com/66. And just as a quick summary, Sharon was my first guest from Where's Sharon? So you can find her at where'ssharon.com. She has so much great info on there. In fact, for my recent trip to Malaysia and Singapore, I think I pretty much exclusively relied on what she had to tell me. So especially if you're looking for Southeast Asia travel with families, she's got so much good stuff there. And for the fellow bloggers out there like me, also check out Sharon's site, digitalnomadwannabe.com. Also great info. After Sharon, I chatted with Brooke McAlary, and you can find Brooke at slowyourhome.com or, of course, on the Slow Home podcast. Now, Brooke very excitingly has a brand new book out. Now, I actually got an email this morning to say that my copy should be delivered today or tomorrow, so I am waiting for the delivery man. Her new book is called Slow, and I cannot wait to read it. So I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. Finally, I chatted with Penny Wincer, and given her optimistic outlook, it's not surprising that her blog is called applesandoptimists.com. And she's very creative and artistic. She's a photographer by trade, and you can find her on Instagram with lots of beautiful stuff. And she is Penny Wincer on Instagram. Now, do come over to the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group where we have lots of interesting chats. I'd love to hear about how you travel with kids or how you travelled as a kid. So come along to Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook. I'll leave a link in the show notes for that, or just look up Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook. You can also get hold of me on Twitter at Amanda Kendall. Use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod. Or even connect with me on Instagram. I have recently been a bit more Instagrammy. I go in phases, I think. And you can find me at Amanda Kendall on Instagram as well. So I look forward to chatting to you again soon. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.